Misplaced Monk here. Today's video, Captain Marvel vs. the Brood Part 1. Here we go. This beef history starts in the year of 1963. The X-Men and their +1, Carol Danvers, were invited by Lilandra, Empress of the Shi'ar Empire, aboard her space yacht. She wanted to thank the heroes for helping her during the events in the Phoenix story arc by throwing them a banquet. As the group was enjoying the festivities, Wolverine would sense that evil was afoot, but would decide not to worry about it. Lilandra would begin to give a toast when suddenly she became lost in a trance. As Cyclops and Nightcrawler assessed her condition, they were surprised by Lilandra's evil sister, Deathbird. She would inform them that Lilandra was no more, and she was now the new Empress of the Shi'ar Empire. The X-Men would try to attack Deathbird, but she was protected by an energy field. Suddenly, the X-Men, along with Carol, were knocked unconscious by a bomb hidden under the table. Their brood would appear. They would tell Deathbird she did well, and that the X-Men will do well as host forms for their offspring. At this point in the story, the X-Men, along with Carol, were captured by the Brood. Although they were put under a trance, they believed they were still at the banquet. Wolverine, however, would catch glimpses of their reality. To make matters worse, the harder Wolverine tried to make sense of things, the more disoriented he became. At that moment, Carol would approach him.
Care to dance, Logan? Hey, are you alright?
Carol, something screwy. This isn't what it seems. We're being conned. Set up.
Sure we are, Wolvie. I think you're getting paranoid in your old age. Relax. Have fun. Enjoy the party.
Carol and Wolverine were soon interrupted by two Shi'ar scientists. One of them would comment that they've noticed that Carol's physiology was different compared to the others.
I'm not a mutant, if that's what you mean.
The scientists would go on to say that their primary data scans on her were most intriguing, and that he and his colleague would like to examine her further. Carol would agree to this despite Wolverine's warning. He was able to break this false reality for a brief moment to see Carol being taken away by two Brood drones. Sadly, due to the power of this illusion, Wolverine would be sucked back in, believing he imagined seeing the Brood. The X-Men were then taken to Lilandra to receive their rewards. Beside her was a tall, strange-looking female. She would command the X-Men to step before her one by one, and then gazed upon them. Wolverine would try to attack her once it was his turn, but he was paralyzed. He was then able to see that the woman was the Brood Queen, and she wasn't gazing upon the heroes. She was inserting Brood embryos inside of them. Wolverine would eventually break free of the illusion and find himself in the carcass of a gigantic dead creature. He would try to wake up Storm and Kitty Pryde, but they were still deep in the illusion. He would then learn the X-Men's fate as he watched an impregnated being painfully transform into a Brood drone. Shocked by what he just saw, Wolverine would attack the newly formed Brood and force it to fly him back to the palace. Mid-flight, however, the embryo would start gestating within Logan. The Brood drone would drop Wolverine into a group of drones, but he would make easy work of them. Wolverine would then begin to experience birth pains. Due to Wolverine's healing factor, he was able to overpower the birthing process. Although his immune system saved him, he was worried about his friends. If they can't be cured, he'll have to kill them. She shrieks, she sobs, but the torment never ends. The Brood scientists would coldly refer to Carol as a bipedal hominid female as she continued to cry out in pain. The scientists would reveal that they chose to impregnate the X-Men so their hatchlings can absorb the X-Men's powers and genetic potential. Carol, however, was an anomaly, neither mutant nor baseline human. Her DNA matrix, in their opinion, was unique. The scientists would continue saying, To help determine the full ramifications of their findings, they were subjecting her to evolutionary modification. They were changing her physical form at will. But what the scientists found most fascinating was Carol's psychic resistance. Even though she was experiencing unendurable pain, she remained conscious and aware. Soon, we would see Wolverine, who followed Carol's scent to the lab. After wiping out the scientists, Wolverine returned his attention to Carol. As he gazed upon her, he would comment that she was barely recognizable as a human being. Her features flowed like hot wax, shaped out of some sicko sculptor's hand, shifting without rhyme or reason. Wolverine would attempt to shut down the machine, but wonder if he should, saying there wasn't a guarantee she'll revert back to being human. Maybe it would be better to take her out of her misery. Frustrated, Wolverine would just smash the control panel to bits. Luckily, this strategy worked. Carol would revert back to her human form, then fall away from the machine. Wolverine would clothe her and tell her that he thinks she'll be okay. As Carol regained her bearings, she would say,
"Fire burning within me. So bright, so beautiful. Logan, help me!"
Wolverine would say to himself he didn't know how. He knew she wasn't alright. She looked normal, but her scent was no longer that of a human. Carol would come around and thank Logan for saving her. As Carol grabbed a weapon, she would say,
"Strange. After all the sleazoids put me through, you'd think I'd be weak, physically shot to pieces. But I feel better than I have in ages, literally bursting with energy."
Wolverine would hope that feeling lasts as they made their escape. Carol and Logan would eventually run into a recently awakened Cyclops and Storm. Wolverine would advise the group that they needed to find the other X-Men and then leave. After being asked how, Logan would suggest Lilandra's yacht. After locating Colossus, Kitty Pryde, and Nightcrawler, Cyclops would split the team up. Team Storm would locate the ship, while his team located Lilandra. As Logan led the team by his sense of smell, he debated telling them about the eggs they were hosting. They would soon reach a fork in the road. Logan would say the tunnel on the left leads to Lilandra, and the one on the right leads to the Brood Queen. Wolverine would say if they killed her, they'll cripple the hive. Scott would disagree, saying that's not why they're here, reminding Logan that the X-Men don't kill. Logan would say this was no time for rules, this was war.
"Gentlemen, I suggest you postpone your discussion."
The team would find themselves surrounded by Brood drones. One of the drones would shout to the others, take them alive, and harm them as little as possible. As the X-Men fought, Carol would tell them to hold the fort while she rescues Lilandra. Blatantly disobeying Cyclops' orders, Wolverine would charge down the right tunnel until he was face to face with the Queen. Carol and Lilandra would soon join the X-Men. As they laid down suppressing fire, Carol would say,
"We have what we came for, Cyclops. I suggest a strategic withdrawal."
"You heard the lady, troops." Wolverine would say no, he doesn't leave a job until it's finished. Cyclops would say staying there could finish them, but Wolverine would say they're as good as dead. Meanwhile, Team Storm will make it to Lilandra's yacht. Even though a Brood drone laid in wait for them, Kitty would pull an Ellen Ripley and blow the drone out of the airlock. Back in the hive, the ground team had their hands full as they were being overwhelmed by the Brood.
"The ship should have been ours by now, Scotty. We should have been beamed up."
Scott would agree as Logan charged at the Queen. Scott would tell Logan no, but Lilandra would tell Scott he was a fool. She would say Wolverine was right. There is no place here for chivalry or honor, only death, life, defeat, or victory. Wolverine would go in for the kill, but suddenly, the heroes would begin to phase away. Team Storm was able to beam the group aboard the yacht and fly away. As the team regrouped and discussed their next move, Wolverine would shout at Cyclops, telling him if he had just 10 more seconds, he could have finished off the Queen. Kitty would ask Logan why he was so angry and why he wanted to kill the Queen so bad. As Logan was about to finally tell the group about their situation, a Brood fighter craft began firing on them. Lilandra would tell them that they were losing shields, but the yacht had weapons. She would tell the group to use them along with their powers. "Keep the brood at bay," shouted Lilandra as they ran towards the weapon control center. Once there, Carol and Logan began to catch on quickly, taking out a few of the brood, while the other X-Men struggled with taking a life, even under their circumstances. However, due to their unwillingness to kill, the yacht took a direct hit. When asked if it was serious, Lilandra would say the warp drive was damaged and needed to be repaired on the outside of the ship. Pride would volunteer, stating she will be able to phase through the incoming fire while she repaired the ship. Scott would protest against this, but Pride would assure him that she'll be careful. Once she had the necessary equipment, Kitty would phase through the primary hall and began the spacewalk. At that moment, in the weapons control center, Carol seemed to be having an episode. She would say to herself,
What the? My vision suddenly went blurry. I saw colors, images I never dreamed possible. But everything's normal now. Probably stress, a delayed reaction to the treatment I received from the brood.
Back in space, due to Storm's unwillingness to kill the brood, the yacht would take heavy blast damage. Shrapnel from the impact would injure Kitty as she was too distracted with repairs to phase in time. In the weapons control center, Carol would have another spell of weirdness, worse than before. Although the sensations weren't unpleasant, they were totally strange.
The brood subjected me to evolutionary modification. I guess they must have triggered something inside me. But what?
Kitty would tell Lilandra that she was bleeding, but didn't think it was serious. Lilandra would tell her to come inside and the mission was canceled, but Pride would say she could do it, even as the brood was closing in. Suddenly, without warning, Carol would burst into a glow of bioluminescence. Thanks to the brood's meddling, Carol's untapped potential was being realized with a vengeance. She would cry out in wonder more than fear, for the process seemed surprisingly natural. Like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, a blinding light flared within her soul, a thing apart from her that instantly became a part of her to form a union that will last till death. I always assumed this was the point where Carol made her connection to the white hole. The light is power, and Carol uses it without hesitation, totally wiping out the remaining brood fighters. Right on cue, Kitty would finish the repairs, telling Lilandra to activate the warp drive. As the yacht began to reach light speed, Carol would call out for Kitty, hoping she phased back inside the ship in time, but received no response. As the yacht flew through space, it seemed to be covered by an aura of bright light. As Pride recovered from the warp jump, she was too tired and weak to move. She would call out, asking if anyone could hear her.
Kitty?
Pride would stare in astonishment as she beheld Carol in her binary form. Sometime later, we see the band of heroes sitting in a darkened area of the yacht. Cyclops would ask if Carol's transformation was permanent. Kitty Pryde would say Carol was so beautiful. She thought Carol was an angel when she saw her. Kitty would then ask why the ship wasn't moving. Lilandra would explain that even though the repairs worked, the warp drive was now totally inert. On top of that, they lost main and auxiliary power, which means no life support. Unless they can regenerate the matter-antimatter cores, they'll all freeze and suffocate to death. The only way to regenerate the core was by saturating the cells with energy. Storm would offer her lightning, and Cyclops his optic blast.
Nowhere near enough, Aurora. To do it right, what's needed is the functional equivalent of a star.
Once inside the engine room, Carol would reach from within herself, then release a massive amount of energy, bringing life back to Lilandra's yacht. Carol would emerge from the engine room lightheaded and woozy.
I was wondering if my new incarnation had an upper limit to its abilities. Now I know.
But what a limit, commented Cyclops. After some time, we see Carol and Colossus outside the ship making repairs. As he worked, Carol would inform him that her cosmic awareness and ability to become one with the universe was far beyond what her old friend Captain Marvel was capable of achieving. She would say that this was due to the fact that when she uses her powers, she taps into a white hole. Carol's energy source was the primal fabric of the universe.
Like a star, I can generate heat, light, radiation across the spectrum, gravity, and my perceptions, Colossus. You can't imagine what I see. How wondrous it is.
You sound very happy.
Don't I, though?
Colossus would say such abilities will be valuable to the X-Men. When asked if that was an invitation to join, he would say she was now a mutant and she has always been a friend. Although she was flattered, Carol had no desire to stay on Earth. Since she was a teenager, she's always dreamed about becoming an astronaut, to explore space, discover new worlds, and alien civilizations. As Miss Marvel, she almost made it, but now her dreams have come true, beyond her wildest expectations.
Returning with you means rejecting my heart's desire, but fulfilling that desire means leaving everyone and everything I love. Earth was Carol Danvers' home, Colossus, but I fear it has no place for binary.
In the shuttle bay, Storm would notice that in the past few hours, her powers had been fluctuating, so she tried to fly to test herself, but suddenly she felt a terrible pain in her abdomen. Scott would enter the bay in time to see her fall. Once recovered, Storm would deduce and tell Scott that her waning powers had to be caused by pregnancy, due to the fact that she sensed life within her. Confused by her own deduction, Storm would focus on the life energy within her to see where it came from. Once she saw it, she would yell "Goddess," then cause a great wind to sweep Cyclops across the length of the shuttle bay, then out of the hatch. As Storm flew away in a shuttle, Scott would call out for her. Soon after, the rest of the team would come to Scott's side to see him holding Storm's uniform. Wanting to get to the bottom of what was going on, Scott would ask Wolverine what information he was hiding. Finally coming clean, Logan would tell the crew that they were all carrying a brood egg within them. The egg contained an embryonic queen. It bonded itself to their nervous system, so it can't be surgically removed. Once it hatches, the host body is reshaped into a brood youngling. Angered by what she just heard, Binary would declare vengeance on the brood. Blinded by rage, Binary would recklessly fly straight through the hull of the yacht, leaving the X-Men to deal with the vacuum of space. On the Brood home planet, Brood drones laid in wait as they prepared to enslave an Akanti that they infected with a virus. As they were about to make their move, one of the drones would see a bright light heading towards their city. As they questioned what was happening, Binary would fly through major structures, causing multiple explosions. The Brood would try to fight back, firing at her, but it did them no good, as Carol would cause further destruction by destroying their fleet of star cruisers. In a matter of minutes, Binary had brought down the entire Brood city. Carol would then turn her attention to the Akanti, which was stuck to 4 barbs, holding it in place. Carol would promise to set the creature free. The Akanti would telepathically tell Carol that the effects of the Brood virus were irreversible, so releasing it wouldn't do any good. Carol would say,
Then there is only one way for you to become truly free. Is that what you want?
The Akanti would answer yes, and its wishes were immediately granted.
That's another life the Brood owes me. It's a mistake they'll live to regret.
Once Carol rejoined with the rest of the team, Logan would suggest that in the little time they have left, they can make sure that the Brood isn't doing this to anyone else. Cyclops would call the plan a suicide attack, but Lilandra would say if they were already doomed, they have nothing to lose. Storm would say that would accomplish nothing. The stakes were far higher than mere vengeance. Cyclops would tell Storm that it was easy for her to say since she destroyed her embryo. Oh yeah, so after when Storm flew away in the shuttle, she would get caught inside of a nebula in deep space. While there, Storm would begin to transform, but once the ship was clear of the nebula, the process would begin to reverse. Storm figured that she was able to draw both spiritual and material substance from the living stars and living worlds around her. That sudden influx of power caught the embryo off guard, killing it in the process. Storm would then tell the group a tale about the Prophet Singer, the leader of the Akanti. This Akanti was the caretaker of the soul of the entire race. Upon his death, the Prophet Singer would throw his body into a star. Once his body was consumed, his soul would be released and passed to his successor. Without that soul, the Akanti as a race could not survive. When the late Prophet Singer died, the brood grounded him on a nearby planet and turned his rotting corpse into their throne city. With the soul trapped in the carcass and the Akanti still bound to it, the race was doomed if they left and doomed if they stayed. But after eons of bondage, a new Prophet Singer was conceived. But before the baby could come to term, the mother was infected with the slave virus. Rather than risk her son's life, she gave premature birth. This was the Akanti that Carol euthanized. Due to the new Prophet Singer's fragile state, the Akanti found Storm floating in space after she purged the brood embryo and bonded her physically and psychologically with the infant. In return, his body's natural healing abilities will restore her body to full health. Storm would then tell the X-Men if they can release the trapped soul, it can then pass on to the infant so he can lead the Akanti to safety. She would reveal that the soul is trapped in the base of the prophet's skull. Cyclops would then devise a plan. Storm and Binary were to create a diversion to draw as much of the brood's attention away from the planet, while the rest of the team releases the trapped soul. A day later, the team would arrive at the brood homeworld. Storm would lead the infant directly to the corpse of the fallen Prophet Singer, then quickly soared upward. At that moment, Cyclops and the ground squad were beamed down into the skeleton as Storm drew the brood's attention off-world. Inside the hive, the Queen is brought up to speed on what's happening. During this briefing, it is revealed that one of the X-Men's transformation has begun, and that very team member revealed the plan to release the soul. The unknown team member would say the X-Men still believes them to be a trusted member, then asked if they should kill the team before they started to suspect anything. The Queen would say no, but be ready to strike when she commands. At that point, the Queen would tell her warriors to head to the soul to stop the X-Men. Overwhelmed by the sheer number of brood ships, Carol would be stunned by a blast. The brood would then bind her with snare lines, with the hopes of infecting her with the slave virus. With Carol neutralized, the brood would then concentrate their fire on the young Prophet Singer. Just as things were looking grim, Storm would see a ship coming out of warp space. It was the Starjammers. Now deeper within the corpse, Wolverine would tell Cyclops that he hasn't seen Kitty in a while. Uncharacteristically, Cyclops would say that Kitty knew the risk and accepted them, and if Wolverine was so concerned, he should go and look for her. Wolverine would begin to notice that Cyclops' aim was getting worse as the battle raged on. It was as though Cyclops' mind knew how to use his optic blast, but his body forgot. Logan would then take a whiff of Scott's scent, then immediately attack Scott with a spear. Wolverine would then remove Cyclops' visor, revealing Scott to be the Brood Queen's spy. Brood Scott would then optic blast both Wolverine and Colossus, stating that the same transformation will claim them all. Lilandra would take charge, telling Nightcrawler to keep Cyclops occupied, while she and her energy sword do the rest. But before they could, they were ambushed by Brood drones. With the entire ground team unconscious, the Brood Mother would appear. Brood Scott would ask the Queen if he should kill Wolverine, due to his inability to be transformed. The Queen would say no, she wanted the pleasure of eating him alive. He will watch as I consume each succulent morsel. Meanwhile, we see Kitty Pryde on the run. With the Brood closing in, Kitty would attempt to phase through the floor, but would instead smash into the ground head first. She would conclude that she was too exhausted to phase as the Brood drones closed in. One of the drones would tell her that after such a hunt, they will ordinarily feast on her living heart, but the Queen wants her alive. As the Brood prepared to capture Kitty, a dragon-like creature would appear and bellow a mighty roar. This would cause the brood to retreat, but the creature would shoot a blast of fire, consuming the fleeing brood, reducing them to ashes. As the creature flew towards Kitty, she deduced that it must be friendly since she was still alive. Suddenly, a stray brood drone would fire upon the duo. Although it missed them, the blast punched a hole through a wall into some kind of cavern. Once Kitty recovered, she would be entranced by a bright light emitting from the cavern. Pride would comment that it was so bright and beautiful in there, while the drone would yell that it burned. Soon, Kitty and the drone would disappear into the blinding light, but seconds later, the silence was broken by a scream. Not too far away, the ground team were restrained until the metamorphosis began. Brood Scott would suddenly double over in pain, then hit the queen with a full, unfiltered optic blast. Seeing that the drone had no idea how to control Scott's powers, Wolverine would use this moment to make a move. Although Wolverine would find himself in the path of the optic blast, the blast would merely remove Logan's restraints. Capitalizing on Brood Scott's weakened state, Logan dashed forward with a leaping left cross, relieving Brood Scott of consciousness. As a group of armed brood moved in, Logan would tell them to drop their weapons or he'll kill the queen. As their weapons fell, Logan would tell the brood to release the other X-Men. Once Cyclops and the queen were restrained, the team would use Logan's sense of smell to follow Kitty Pryde's scent to the bright cavern. Once they arrived, Logan would say he smells the drone inside the cavern as well. Suddenly, Kitty would emerge from the light, telling them that the drone turned into crystal, and she was purged of the brood embryo. The group would soon enter the cavern, which seemed to be made of pure crystal. As Kitty commented on the loving and welcoming feeling she felt, the queen would say she only feels a deep sense of hatred towards her. Colossus would direct the team's attention to the crystal below the queen, which was turning black, but the queen would point out that the same was happening to the infected team members as well, believing that their presence was corrupting the cavern. Sensing danger, Logan would tell everyone to fall back, but the queen would get the drop on Logan, stabbing him in the back with her barbs. Logan would then remove the queen's stingers, but she would tell him it was too late and he was going to die. Logan would admit that there might be more venom in his system than he could handle, but he wasn't stopping until he was done. He would then stare at his team in horror. They were all beginning to change into brood warriors. The queen would then taunt Wolverine, telling him that once they're all consumed, so shall the Acanti's soul along with them, solidifying the brood's rule across the stars. Not one to take an L lying down, Wolverine would unsheath his claws, declaring he'll kill his teammates and the queen before that happens. But before Wolverine could execute his plan, Carol would fly through the cavern wall and grab Logan.
Whoa, son. Let's not be too hasty.
Carol, can't you see what's happening?
Trust me, Logan. I know what I'm doing. You look awful, old friend.
Feel worse.
Rest easy. I'll have you aboard the Starjammer for care as soon as I'm finished here.
Logan would tell her to forget about him and save the others and the Acanti. The queen would chime in and tell Logan that even if he can slay her, there was still an infected X-Men hosting a royal embryo, and when it hatched, the Earth would be doomed. Carol would ignore the queen as she became an eldritch creature of light and fire, a living star. Her celestial light was reflected and amplified by the crystal cavern until she generated enough power to release the Acanti's soul. It would then fly upwards into space towards the living prophet singer and bind it with him. The Acanti were now free. Logan would warn Carol that even with the soul free, they couldn't let the others complete their metamorphosis.
It's a moot point, partner. Take a look. I think the soul took care of things for us by purging the embryos from their bodies. And it seems the brood queen was made as pure as that which she was sworn to destroy.
Suddenly, the entire planet began to shake.
When I unleashed the soul, I was playing with forces on a pretty cosmic scale. There's no telling what effect those kind of primal stresses will have on the planet. But I suggest we don't stick around to find out. Corsair, do you read me?
Perfect, my dear.
Lock onto my signal and pick us up pronto.
The Starjammers would teleport them off the planetary surface, then take off. No sooner than they left the Brood's home planet, it was rather abruptly removed from the celestial stage. Aboard the Starjammer, in the medical bay, the X-Men were patched up, and Storm was restored to her original body. As the team rejoiced on a job well done, Logan would remind them of something the Queen said before she died. There was another royal embryo that threatened the Earth itself. He figured there's only one person who could be hosting it, Professor Charles Xavier. Back on Earth, at Professor Charles Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, we see a group of new mutants. As they gathered around the television watching a movie, the X-Men would storm the school from all sides. While the majority of the group kept the new mutants busy downstairs, Kitty Pryde would quietly phase through a window upstairs and head into Charles Xavier's office. Once in his office, Kitty would find it odd that Charles was asleep. If the fight downstairs didn't wake him, her thoughts should have done the trick. Kitty would then call out to the professor, but when he awoke he would say, "You should have fired. Your hesitation will cost you dear." Not long after, Kitty would come crashing out of the professor's office down to the first floor. Charles would then greet his X-Men and then tell them not to worry about Kitty, for she is beyond help, but rather fear for themselves. At that moment, the X-Men watched in horror as Charles Xavier formed into a young queen of the Brood. "Does my form displease you, X-Men?" she taunted. Cyclops would respond with an optic blast, sending the queen flying out of the school into a field near Colossus. He would try to engage the queen, but she would remind him that with the professor's powers, she could counter his plans the moment he conceived them. The group would soon find Colossus being held by the queen. She would tell the group if they wanted to live, they should flee. Not one from running from a fight, Wolverine would charge head-on at the queen. He would surprisingly be able to slice off her deadly stinger before she used her telekinesis to send him flying. Due to her injuries, the queen would fly off in hopes of finding a place to hide and restore her health. But as she flew, a bright soaring light would catch her eye. What is that? Suddenly, the light would hit the queen with a swift uppercut.
"The name's Binary. I hate to disillusion you, monster, but from us, there is no escape."
As the queen fell, she would be swept up in a fierce blizzard conjured by Storm, which froze the queen to the bone marrow. As the team gathered around the fallen queen, Storm would tell them that she could have killed the queen with a lightning bolt, but she couldn't do it. Wolverine would tell her there was no shame in being who she was, but he would quickly move in on the queen, saying he was the killer on the team. Cyclops would stop him, saying since he was the first X-Men, it was his responsibility to do the deed. Scott would look down on the queen, saying, "Forgive me, Professor, if there was any alternative." But before Scott could finish his thought, the professor would say, "There is none, Scott." Shocked, Cyclops would call out to Xavier. Charles would confirm it was him speaking. Storm's attack granted him control over the Queen, but eventually, the Queen's persona will overwhelm him. So for the good of Earth and humanity, he begged Scott to kill him. "You heard the man." Scott would say he heard the same thing from Phoenix before she died, and he never had the chance to save the woman he loved. He'd be damned if he was going to watch Charles Xavier go the same way. So long as there is hope, no matter how slight, the X-Men fight to preserve life, to create, rather than destroy. Any objections? Outside of Wolverine, the team agreed with Scott. Thanks to the effort of Dr. McTaggart, they were able to use tissue samples that were collected from Charles and clone him a new body. Once that was complete, they were able to transplant his mind from the Queen's body into the clone. So the Brood was defeated for now. And that was the beef origins of Captain Marvel and the Brood, Part 1. Stay tuned. None of this is real.